If we just take the commentary, for example, your deployment of adjectives is extraordinary. My favorite is when you say that's a scintillating attack. Are these words that are in your daily lexicon, or do you curate and select certain words ready to be deployed live on air?
That's another really, really good question. They're all words that I will use. Occasionally, you might hear a word that's like, nobody says that word, but then they're words you can't repeat, or you might save them. I mean, I know a few of my fellow commentators, if you're commentating on a very big race, for example, I mean, all races are important, but the classics or a stage of the tour or the Olympics or the Worlds, and there's a clear-cut move that goes clear and it's one rider that's going to win. It's at that point you can actually start jotting down one or two little notes so you can really make that final 100 meters as they cross the line like sing. Often you can never do that because it's a sprint of 5 or it's a bunch sprint and it's just chaos. And so there's less adjectives, more energy in terms of your delivery because you just haven't got time to list all the team names, the colors, the direction, who's overtaking who. But when there's a single rider clear, you do have time to craft something of a little bit of heft, and so you might jot down a couple of words that you might not have mentioned that day. You certainly wouldn't want to use a particularly obtuse adjective if you've used it already that day. It seems a little bit, gratuitous. So there's once or twice in big races where I've jotted not the whole sentence, but these are the words I want to use because this needs to be special. And that rider's going to remember that, and that's going to get played on social. So it needs to be hopefully good. So there's a few times when you might do that, but generally speaking, I'm just interested in. My wife Holly is a writer. We've got a house full of books. She's in far better read than I am, but I do take an interest in film and in books. So and language, and my job is to communicate. So I don't go out and look for new words. It's just I'm 54 now and I've been around a long time, so they just kind of seep. If you're consuming a lot of culture and reading a lot of stuff, generally you're going to have a lot more language to draw from and use it when you need to within cycling. Because I think what you don't want to do is try and speak as if you're belittling anybody, and so this is my command of English, and I'm going to bamboozle you by my stunning lexicon. It's not what that's about. It's about conveying as best you can using accessible words. The more language you can deploy, the more layered of feeling you can get across. But I'll draw on what I've got. And sometimes words will come in that are kind of a little bit I've not used before. It's like, wow, and that actually fitted. And I sometimes get a little compliment. I can't believe you just put that word in, but it's kind of nice because those words are there for a reason, to explain and to amplify certain situations and certain dynamics. Rather than that, no, that's a really great attack. That's fine, but you start saying that's another great attack. I mean, we all have our own tics. And there'll be sentences that I use, that Rob uses, that Carlton uses, that Sean uses, that when you're doing 5 hours, there's going to be a repetition. So because of that, I do try and introduce different structure, and not so much consciously. It's just something I've always tried to do. But I think language is just a wonderful thing. But it's not like I'm not doing a conscious effort to impress anybody. I just think I actually enjoy it. It's basically I enjoy learning. And as I've got older, I enjoy learning even more. I didn't really enjoy it at school as much. I had a great time at school, but I was just sports. Now it's like, oh shit, I wish I'd learned a bit more or studied a bit more. So I find learning just brilliant. And so if I can incorporate any of that into like cultural references, subtle ones, again, not necessarily trying to impress people, but just to try and broaden the scope of being on air for 4 or 5 hours. When I work with Ned, I like working with Ned on the Giro for the world feed because he's a historian basically. Is exceptionally well read. Of course, he's a writer, and when the racing settles into 3 riders up the road, bunch behind at 3 minutes, not much going on, that's when you can really draw on that. And then language becomes even more important to hold people, even if it's just old stories of what we've done in the past, or references to places that you're passing through. So language is massively important, and the deeper you go without alienating anybody, you can do it in a style that's quite gentle, and just drop things in and just add color to the whole thing.
So that deliberate approach of bringing culture and color into your commentary is really nicely juxtaposed against the raw emotion that you bring to it at the time. So when you were talking there, I think it was 2019 Amstel Gold came to mind when Van der Poel won. He came back from nowhere and then won. And your commentator was Rob Hatch, and Rob's bringing Van der Poel home as he's done this long sprint. And if you listen really carefully in the background, you can just hear you just gasping and laughing at this whole thing that's going on. Moments like that must be special.
Yeah, that's a particularly... I mean, I didn't hold anything back there, and I did think, oh, was that a little bit unprofessional? I don't even think, Joe, you have to listen too hard. I'm quite high in the mix. But that commentary gets played still quite often. And I was on site with Rob, so we were working for the World Feed. It wasn't Eurosport, but that's the one that generally gets played. I think it was Declan who was doing the Eurosport one. I think he did a very good job as well. But it was just, I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. I mean, it's one of the best finishes to a race ever. And to be there to witness it, and we'd just seen that morning Cassia win her race in Amstel. So we were absolutely buzzing. And we were both stood up as well. So normally I sit down. Rob tends to stand up in a final. I still sit down, but on this occasion it was so thrilling that I stood up. I had my cans on, and I was just, my professionalism just kind of dropped away, and I was just a fan. But a lot of the time, you do have to hold a program together. But moments like that, I don't think there's any harm in giving away the fact that you really do care. You're emotionally completely and utterly invested and connected to what, and I think that's why that particular bit of commentary is so popular. Well, firstly because of what you're seeing on the screen, but a good commentary does elevate what you're seeing and gives it that added sense of drama. It's like the soundtrack to a film, a lovely bit of cinematography. You add the score to it, it kind of lifts it up a notch, doesn't it? It's I know they're very, very different things, but they are similar. But no, I actually got quite. There's a few times where I think I was clapping as well, so you could hear me clapping in the background. So, but and I said afterwards, I said to Rob, I said, "Was that unprofessional?" He said, "No, mate, it was." And we agreed that every now and again you're just floored by something, and that was pretty special because you can't do that all the time. But that particular occasion, and if things like that happen in the future, I'm not going to hold back on my emotion. And Rob doesn't, Carlton doesn't. They're both very different commentators. We all have our own style, but ultimately, I think showing that you care, and as long as you don't keep bursting into tears, is actually quite important. Because I've actually got the privilege of watching this bike race and conveying the essence of what it is. And the complexity of it to you, and also telling the story. And so you're a storyteller. So there's a massive responsibility. And to be too detached from that and too formal, it just falls flat. So, and it has to be balanced, but the responsibility is to basically be as good a storyteller as you can. And actually being emotionally invested, I don't think is a bad thing. I think it can heighten the experience for the viewer personally.